Thank you very much, Phil. Just want to check I've got that setting. Hopefully you can hear me and see my slides. I'm Matthew Deeprose, Accessible Solutions Architect from the University of Southampton. For those who don't see me, I'm a white male in my late 40s. I'm wearing glasses, a charcoal suit with a moss green shirt and matching pocket square. My pronouns are he, him. And today I'll share how I've used generative AI to improve digital accessibility efficiency based on my experiences with Copilot, Whisper and Claude AI. I have a webpage with all the details I share today and the slide deck at go.sutton.ac.uk/Kent2. That's the number 2 at the end, all as one word. And Stephen has added the link to the chat. To open the theme of this presentation, let's start with a tweet from @Magardana, posted in 2021. It reads, "Accessibility isn't more work. You were just cutting corners before. The work was incomplete." And she's saying that a web page, document or online service isn't ready until everyone can use it, regardless of any disability or impairment. But for our colleagues, making content accessible will seem like more work because it is a new area to them. So my question is, can we use AI to reduce effort or workload or otherwise increase efficiency with any of the digital accessibility workflows we might expect our colleagues to complete? My presentation has 2 parts to answer these questions. First, I'll share how Copilot, Whisper and Claude AI made certain digital accessibility workflows more efficient by reducing my time. And there's more details on these in a recent presentation on my website. So this will be more of an overview and you can find more details on that site. Next, using a recent example, I'll discuss how Copilot and Claude AI helped me to create a tool for academic staff to make certain resources more accessible to a specific student group. Let's start exploring how AI can improve digital accessibility workflow efficiency. We'll start with a short and fairly niche scenario, which I call creating sample content. I'm meeting teams around the university who want an introduction to digital accessibility. We have online training available, but meeting teams and discussing accessibility within the context of their work with examples to work through can be quite effective. But I've also found it's better not to use real world content. If we don't approach this in the right way, colleagues might feel that their content is being singled out. But creating example content that is more meaningful than a chunk of lorem ipsum placeholder text can be a challenge. I gave a session to a group of project managers and analysts, and in preparation, I asked Copilot to create me a project update document for a fictitious project that aims to make project managers more efficient by using cats. I stated that the document should have an overview of the project aims, red, amber, green ratings for time and cost, a list of deliverables and a roadmap. I could then adjust the content it gave me by adding some accessibility issues myself that the group could remediate while we covered the topics. And on screen, I'm browsing through my document. I've added defects like aspects of low contrast. I've made the red, amber, green rating use color alone to express meaning. I've got a table without the proper headings, poorly crafted links, list without list semantics, and so on. The content itself is slightly facetious, but I've avoided using real world content. I've avoided using lorem ipsum placeholder text. I've got elements that would appear in a project document, and it took 10 minutes altogether to create. Creating a fictitious comment to work on is time consuming if you make it yourself from scratch. So using Copilot for this task saved me a lot of time. My next scenario is creating a transcript from corrected video captions. Back in January this year, we were creating an accessibility video for our doctoral college. And having completed the captions using Subtitle Edit, we wanted to create a transcript. Transcripts have many benefits. Not everyone wants to or can watch a video. A transcript allows more options to engage with your content. This feedback from a member of our neurodivergent staff group explains this well. They said, "The thing that I find most annoying is the way online training is often set up. I don't learn well with videos, flashing moving images on screens or endless things to click on, to flip or open or whatever. It can get disorientating and it makes it harder to take in the information because of the demands of interacting with the screen. I'd rather just be given the information transcript style so I can read it." Having a transcript can help you to more easily create further resources like blog posts, articles, and so on from that transcript source, depending on the context and purpose of your original content. And of course, from an accessibility point of view, as well as being a benefit, depending on the level of compliance we're aiming for, we are required to provide equivalent alternatives to media content, such as a well-prepared transcript. So going back to my scenario, Subtitle Edit has an export text feature to turn the captions into a single block of text. That block of text is not very readable. While I have the punctuation that I had added when creating the captions, there are no paragraphs. Editing that text to set it into paragraphs is a time-consuming and boring task. It would even be slower when we're not familiar with the original text. Could Copilot make this faster? I wrote a prompt asking it to reformat my transcript to be more readable. I specified that it could add headings, set paragraph breaks, and use bullet points where appropriate. In my initial testing, I found that it rewrote the text of my transcript, so I added further information explaining that the words and the order in which they appear should remain unchanged. On screen, I'm showing a recording of Copilot Notebook running that prompt. It is reformatting the transcript as I asked, adding paragraph breaks, headings, and using lists where appropriate. Of course, I had to check the results and I changed them to suit my preference, but it saved me a lot of time and boredom. The result is on screen. I'm showing a Word document version of the transcript with the navigation pane open to show that I've set the headings using heading styles so they will be usable by assistive technologies. In our third scenario, we're approaching transcription from a different angle. The Meliora podcast from the Sustainability and Resilience Institute at the University of Southampton examines topics surrounding sustainability. On screen, the podcast is advertised in our internal University Staff Matters newsletter. However, one of our colleagues in our communications team who writes the newsletter is profoundly deaf and cannot listen to the podcast. She and the podcast host, Professor Simon Kemp, got in touch with me to ask what options were available to make transcripts for the podcast. And since the podcast is an MP3 file, what tools did we already have that could help make a transcript? We use Microsoft Stream, but it can only create captions for video files, not audio files. And converting an MP3 to a video file would work, but requires additional software. I came across Whisper Desktop. It's a Windows open source application designed to run with the open source automatic speech recognition system Whisper, created by OpenAI. And if you have a good graphics card, this tool can run on your Windows computer and transcribe audio or video files, or live speech captured through your microphone. And on my presentation webpage, I have a link to a quick setup guide that I wrote for using Whisper Desktop. During transcription, you can view a live preview. On screen, I'm showing the preview while it transcribed one of Simon's podcasts. It's showing the words it has detected. Each word has a colour going from green to yellow to red. The colour indicates its confidence for accuracy. Now, using colour to express meaning is obviously an accessibility barrier, but this preview is optional and more of a curiosity. It took about 9 minutes to transcribe an hour-long podcast on my work computer with a high level of accuracy. Just like in our first scenario, we have a big lump of unformatted plain text, not very readable. And in this podcast, there are 5 different speakers. Can we get attribution added so we know who is speaking? I wrote a prompt for Copilot. I gave the speakers' names and who is the first speaker. I asked it to write the name of the speaker followed by a colon in bold formatting to appear before each person speaks. I'm asking it to do this based on the text transcript, not the audio file. And on screen, I'm showing a screen recording of Copilot going through that task. It is adding the name of each speaker in bold before they speak. Of course, I then ran our formatting prompt we saw earlier, and now I'm showing the before and after. Our initial block of plain text in comparison with a transcript that has headings, more meaningful paragraph breaks, bullet points, speaker attribution. It's definitely not perfect, but it would take someone much less time to fine-tune and correct this transcript using our adjusted version in comparison to our original block of text. My final scenario in this first section of the presentation is something I came across just last week. We're finding some challenges with the way the Access to Work scheme is currently implemented, and I wanted to get an overview of the process. The government webpage describing the process is 11 pages long if you print it out. My colleagues use a tool called Mermaid to create flowcharts and other types of chart and graph. And you can write out a process in a markdown style language, and it will dynamically convert them into graphical diagrams. So I made a PDF printout. I asked Claude to create a flowchart of the Access to Work process. I specified some accessibility settings it should use. I had already prepared a web page that I could paste the mermaid markup it produced into. Graphical charts need text descriptions as well, of course. I asked Claude to then create a text description of the process in HTML format as an ordered list. I specified that where there was branching in the flowchart, it should specify which numbered step the reader should go to. I could then paste that HTML as a readable written description of the process into my web page. And in less than a minute, I had a visual and written overview of that process at a high level. This use case was more of an experiment, but I like the idea of getting the AI to create the process map in a simple format I can edit myself, as well as providing the long description of that process. And using a semantically ordered list, by the way, gives someone using a screen reader a much more predictable and navigable overview of that process. Copilot can do this too, but I found it would produce errors that I had to manually fix before it would actually work. That concludes my section on using generative AI to make workflows more efficient. And to introduce the next section, let's go back to February 5th, 2021, when Phil invited me to speak at what I think might have been the 5th of the Digitally Enhanced Education webinars. I explained color contrast and digital accessibility and introduced a tool I made that checked which university brand colors we could use together while meeting the web content accessibility guidelines for contrast. And since that presentation, I've used the tool to create these lookup tables for around 20 universities and organizations. And I do love these minimal web pages that offer like one useful feature. Here are a few of my favorites. Arizona State University have brilliant AI tools anyone can use. And recently I used their voiceover generator to create an audio description for a video. Button Buddy helps you choose accessible colors for your buttons, including focus and hover states. And the Tanaguru Contrast Finder helps when you must use a certain shade like orange and white text, which usually lacks sufficient contrast. And this tool finds shades close to your intended color, but with sufficient contrast. Now, I often have ideas for tools like this, but as a non-professional developer with only fundamental JavaScript knowledge, it takes me weeks or months to complete a project in my own time. Could AI help? A few weeks ago, a colleague forwarded me a question from someone in our medicine faculty who teaches embryology and prefers creating their own diagrams. They attended an accessibility session and wanted to ensure their diagrams wouldn't present a barrier to those with color vision deficiency or color blindness. The screen shows an example, a section of the developing embryo with ridges, green and pink, that will form the urogenital system. And in my slide deck, I have a hidden section that explains color blindness or color vision deficiency, which is the term the NHS uses, and which I will now abbreviate to just CVD. I had to drop it for the live presentation so I could fit it into our available time, but you can find it in the slide deck. I explored CVD a little already when I created this color suggester web page, a follow-up to the color matrix aiming to help colleagues find new color combinations from our brand that have sufficient contrast. Pressing the randomize button selects a random background color and shows a text color and three graphic colors, all with sufficient contrast. And I added buttons to simulate how those colors look with different types of CVD. But it took me about 3.5 weeks of evenings to complete this as a personal project, as I first had to figure out what I needed to do and then search online to learn how to do it. To simulate CVD, I used Nicholas Burrows's public domain implementation. When expressing a meaning with color, we should add another method to add understanding. This fictitious example shows an assignment submission screen with a red no button and a green yes button, challenging those with protanopia or deuteranopia, which are types of CVD. And colors have different cultural meanings too. Adding yes and no labels makes this easier to understand for everyone. But in this case, with medical diagrams, labels may not always be desirable, for example, in an assessment. I found a helpful document by Alexandra Phillips at the National Centre for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, which lists CVD-safe palettes. But I first wanted to confirm these colour schemes would work as intended. I wanted to view how these colours would appear to those with CVD. I took the color codes for the palette and put them into a small piece of JSON data. I wanted to use this seed to create a web page showing the colors with different types of CVD, but I lacked experience creating web content from data. So I wrote a prompt for Copilot. Now, this prompt is quite long, so I'll highlight a few key points. You can find all the prompts on my presentation webpage. First, I told Copilot to role play as a senior software engineer passionate about digital accessibility. I explained the structure of the data that I wanted to use. I didn't know how to generate content using data, but I did know how I wanted the data presentation to be structured, so I was very specific about every detail. And Copilot wrote the JavaScript to do exactly what I wanted. I used that to build the page, implement the CVD simulation, and verify each palette's performance. On the screen, I'm scrolling through the resulting web page. So we had potential color palettes and could verify their effectiveness, but it still wasn't user-friendly. What could we do? Fortunately, the example images provided were vector-based, and I could save them as SVG files, scalable vector graphics. SVG files are just text, and they use HTML color codes, giving me an idea. What if we had a tool where you could load your SVG file, see how it looks with different types of CVD, identify the colors used in the file, swap colors using a CVD-friendly palette, and then save the modified file for use in your presentation or whatever. So I wrote another prompt for Copilot, trying to be as specific and descriptive as possible. Again, you can read the whole prompt on the presentation webpage because it is quite long, but Copilot wasn't able to do it for me though. I'd heard great things about Claude AI from Anthropic. It's supposed to excel at tasks like this. Out of curiosity, I paid for my own personal license to use Claude, and it quickly built something for me from the same prompt. And after a few back and forths to improve it, I had a version I could build upon. This is the version Claude made. We have buttons to upload the SVG file. The image displays in 4 windows, but the CVD simulation isn't implemented yet. We have the list of colors in the SVG and options to change the colors using a palette from the JSON file we saw earlier. Next, I took that code and added it into my website and implemented the CVD simulation. And after about 4 hours of effort across 4 days, I was ready to meet the academic and demonstrate the tool. So in this video, I'm showing how to download the picture in SVG format from the PowerPoint that he had provided, and then upload it into the tool that I made. And then we'll be able to preview that image with the different types of color vision deficiency. Get a list of the colors used in the image and pick a CVD-friendly palette. Change a color in the image to one from the palette and preview how that change looks. Then download that SVG and load it back into our PowerPoint. So in this demo, I'm just demonstrating the process, and I'll leave it to the academic to judge whether his images needed updating and to find out which palettes may work best. And we've arranged to meet in December to follow up. So can AI help us to create tools like this? In my limited experience so far, yes. Of course, I kept the scope of my idea as limited as possible. I'm not doing anything that would need authentication or storage, so the technical scope is very simple. And with this use case, what else would I do? Maybe wait for a hackathon where teams might come up with ideas and produce proofs of concepts in a limited time. But using AI in this way made me feel like I was in my own little hackathon, with me playing the role of a product manager and the AI working as a developer, helping to realize my vision. Of course, this approach won't work for everyone. In my case, I already had some knowledge of web technologies and have a website to host these types of tools. I also have a good idea of what should be possible and how it might be done, which can help to write good prompts. And more importantly, I know how to test that the results are accessible. And if I find problems, I should have a good idea how to resolve any defects. So drawing to our conclusion, reflecting on the first part of the presentation, which covered whether Gen AI could make certain digital accessibility workflows more efficient, the crucial first steps are identifying potential use cases where AI could help. And finding these requires imagination and inspiration, followed by the patience to test and validate. And this is where I feel I'm at most of the time. But next, we need to start thinking of ways to make this more approachable and user-friendly. Not everyone wants to use a prompt. Web-based turnkey solutions will be more effective and can use APIs, allowing us to pass more text, such as from those transcripts that we saw. And I really love the Arizona State University's approach, which uses simple pages to perform discrete generative AI tasks. And in the second part, we saw that generative AI tools help me to quickly turn ideas I wasn't sure how to implement into reality. Now, this use case might be particular to me, but I'm sure others in similar roles to me could explore this if they're not already. And I often have ideas for useful tools that could benefit an area of digital accessibility. And now I'm excited to use this new power to make them into a reality. So I hope that at least one of these ideas I shared from my experience is new to you. And I'm very keen to hear from colleagues about any use cases they identified where generative AI was able to assist them with digital accessibility. So please share your experiences in the chat. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn to continue this conversation. Thanks, and back to you, Phil.
Blimey, Matthew, that was outstanding. I would suggest sitting down if you weren't already, because that was quite something. I would just like to say, I posted in the chat, that was a lot to take in quite a short space of time, but don't worry, because we're recording the session, so you can re-watch this recording in our YouTube channel. We'll hopefully get that up there tomorrow. But wow, what a great talk. And just going by the number of reactions that were coming in throughout your talk, Matthew, I know that lots of people were really enjoying that. We have a number of questions, and if you would like to ask a question, if you could raise your hand, and if we've got time to come to you, we will. But in the Q&A, we've got one from Roz, and Roz has asked, is the Whisper audio transcription any better than the built-in ones within Dictate in Microsoft Word, where you can upload an MP3?
That is a great question, Ross. I'm afraid I haven't tested. I didn't even know you could upload an MP3 into Microsoft for dictation. So I need to test that myself. I can't answer it, but I do know that I have been very impressed with the quality of Whisper's transcription. But you do need to have a good graphics card in your PC to use it. Although I just read, things are moving so fast. I read yesterday a new version's been put out there, which should work on lower powered machines as well, which if I can find it, I'll dig out the link. But thanks, and back to you, Phil.
Great, thank you. We've got another one from Jill. And Jill said, Matt, how do you create headings with AI that work in Microsoft Word?
Great question, and hello, Gil. Great to have you with us. What I have found is the outputs produced by Copilot are in a type of markdown language. So it's a markup language, but for some reason it's called markdown. And I have found that if you Google, you can find a markdown to Word converter. Also, I have had experience where I've downloaded the result from Copilot as a Word document, but in those cases, sometimes I found that the headings hadn't been actually transferred across properly. But it is very quick to apply headings. And my top tip, if this is new to you, the keyboard shortcut, hold down Control, Alt, and then the number 1, 2, or 3. And when you're in Word, that will change the text to heading level 1, 2, or 3. If you use 4, you get a euro symbol, but 5 and 6 also work. I haven't worked out how to make it not do the euro symbol and do heading level 4, but it's very rare that I get down to level 4 headings usually. So although I don't have a great answer, hopefully I've given you a coping strategy to get your headings done faster. Thanks, and back to you, Phil.
Thank you. We've got one more in the Q&A, and then we'll open it up. So if anyone wants to ask a question, I think we do still have a couple of minutes left. So this one's from Emma, and Emma's asked, what version of Copilot are you using here? She's wondering if it's Copilot for 365, so for example in Word, or the browser version in Edge.
I'm using the version in the browser that anyone else should be able to use. So you should be able to use it as well, Emma, and great to see you here. One thing I would say, if you're a Microsoft institution, once you've logged into Copilot, just make sure you see that nice green symbol that shows that you are under either commercial data protection or enterprise data protection, which should mean that anything that you enter into Copilot will not be used for training and it won't be remembered. And once you logged in, you should get 30 uses a day rather than the standard 10, which everyone else seems to get. Thanks, and back to you, Phil.
Great, thank you. So if anyone has any questions, we've got a couple of minutes, so if you'd like to raise your hand. While we're waiting for that, because I don't think any hands have come up, there's only none that I can see. You've kind of covered this already, Matt, but there's one question that I'd like to ask is what advice would you give to anyone who's just at the beginning of this? So how would you advise that they start integrating AI tools, like some of the ones that you've mentioned? And is there any that you'd recommend playing with first to kind of ease people in?
Well, I guess Copilot is a great one to start with because many institutions have a relationship with Microsoft, so you don't have to have too many concerns around privacy and so on. In terms of like starting out using the prompts, I think having an idea of what you want to do is it might sound obvious, but for me, when AI first came along, I thought, well, that's cool, but I don't know how I'm going to use it. And it took me until the start of this year that I started having those ideas for actual positive and useful uses. I think in terms of crafting your prompt, I'm afraid I don't have access to the chat, but if you Google Anthropic prompt guide, the company Anthropic, they've got a really good resource on how to craft your prompts. And there's also a video on their YouTube channel where they talk to a bunch of their engineers about how they craft prompts. And I'd recommend having just having a watch of that because I watched that myself to get some ideas. I would also recommend, again, I'm not coming up with practical solutions, just other places to look. As someone who uses the Reddit website, there are Reddits for OpenAI, local LLMs, which is for people that run LLMs on their own machines. There's Anthropic or Claude Reddit, and I often find people sharing what they are doing, what's worked for them. So I found that a very good way to learn from others. I suppose the final thing is just to have a go because you can't really go wrong with Copilot, and you kind of need to, I guess, work it out for yourself in a way because it depends on what you want to do. Afraid that was a bit of a wishy-washy answer, Phil, but back to you for now.
And you're absolutely right. Just having a go is probably the first step. Just have a play around with it because you'll find out, stuff really quickly as you go. So I think that's sound advice. Okay, so Benedict, I have allowed you to unmute yourself and to turn on your camera if you'd like to ask your question.
The microphone is unmuted.
Am I audible now? Cool. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Oh, thank you. So I don't know what's wrong with my camera. But my question, thanks for the presentation. I'm always keen when somebody mentions accessibility because I'm one of those that depend on accessibility. So my question is, how much of those accessibility features that you spoke about kind of like respond to the needs of the persons who rely more on screen readers? Because what I often find is that sometimes things they looked accessible until people like myself who rely more on screen readers get to use them and find, this is not quite accessible as we thought it is. So did you consider or have you ever thought of maybe looking at accessibility in relation to screen readers or screen reader users? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. It's a great question. I have not yet tested like the web-based versions of ChatGPT and Copilot with a screen reader. I do have a colleague who uses a screen reader, and he uses both Copilot and ChatGPT themselves a lot, and they haven't shared with me any issues with the performance of those actual tools. But what I can say from my actual experience is I always keeping in mind the necessity that the outputs I use the AI to create should be accessible. So, for example, when with my prompt for coming up with the tool for changing colors, I'd specified that that they were to role play as someone with a passion for digital accessibility. And when I later on, I'd asked it to write comments on the code that it made to help both me and AI later better understand it. And while it was doing that, it came up with a few ideas. Like it would say, I've spotted there is a keyboard handler here, so make sure we need to add one with an ARIA label to make sure that it will work correctly with a screen reader. So I'm afraid the best answer I can give is to have in mind the necessity for an accessible experience as the outcome. But because I wasn't using the AI as someone with a disability or impairment myself, I can't give a better answer to what I think was the true nature of your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, Paul. We have run out of time for this one, but if you could place your question in the Q&A, I'm sure Matthew will be able to take a look at that one at some point during the webinar. So thank you, and thank you, Matt. So in order to keep time, we're going to move on. So thank you again, Matthew. It's lovely to have you back on, and great work. Really, really great stuff you're doing there.